It's Saturday morning, the 27th of April, and I'm reading the Saturday Morning Telegraph. As I said, I'll read others if you want. Meanwhile, I'm Granniopteryx. Now, as I've said, if enough people want me to read from another paper, I'll do that. Saturday Telegraph is rather fun, though. It tends to have quirky stuff in it. And the first thing I found is this. Jilly Cooper, apparently. It says here, I was jumped on by another author in the back of a cab. I thought that sounded interesting. So, quick cut while I find the article and then I'll read it to you. So, here's Jilly Cooper, an author much loved by the chattering classes, and author of books which have variously been called Arga sagas or bonk busters. An Arga is a very upmarket type of oven and much loved, and for good reason, by people who live in the country because it's independent of gas supplies. You can have Argas run on oil, for instance. Or bottled gas if you get the bottles big enough. And I think they used to have a coal one. So it's quite useful for people who live in the country. Anyway, as she releases her 50th book, the 87-year-old romantic novelist talks to Celia Walden about machismo, cancel culture, and meeting die-hard fan Rishi Sunak. Can you imagine Rishi Sunak, a devotee of this? She gets quite graphic. I remember there is one, and we are getting quite po-faced, quite prim about this sort of thing. There was a Jilly Cooper book called Riders, I think, something like that. And the original book cover showed the lower half of a very fit young woman's body, clad in riding gear with a pair of skin-tight jumpers. Covering but not obscuring her well-formed rear end. And the picture showed the book jacket showed a man's hand, so far as I remember, cupping this rider's rear end. And then when it was re-released quite recently, there was no hand there anymore. They reckoned that was too, hardcore for modern audiences, which in my opinion is a bad sign. Anyway, after going public as a die-hard fan, the PM invited Cooper to number 10 a couple of months ago. He was absolutely adorable. Well, they don't write this, but I say it. Trills Jilly Cooper. He was absolutely adorable. Very handsome too. He's not bad looking, but weak around the eyes. That's my opinion. The gossiping only slackens when we pause to consider whether it would be indecent to start on the champagne at noon. Oh, God, this is quintessentially Telegraph Saturday morning. Born Jilly Salit in Hornchurch, Essex, to what she describes as an upper-middle-class family. Her great-great-great-grandfather founded the Leeds Mercury and her father was a brigadier. It's a good hour before I finally get Cooper onto her most recent work, Tackle. All right. For those of you not in Britain, tackle has several meanings. First of all, there's the rugby tackle, which involves launching yourself. Well, not myself personally, but you get the idea. Launching yourself at whoever's got the whatever that thing is called that's not quite ball-shaped, and grabbing your arms round the legs to overturn the opposing rugby player. So that's a rugby tackle. So I don't know what the book is about, but it might be set in the world of rugby. But there's also the word tackle, which refers to it's one of those euphemisms for part of the male anatomy. So she's good at that sort of thing. To Jilly, okay, she gets, so Tackle is the 11th instalment of the Rutcher Chronicles. She invented this shire, which has all these shire people in it, all of whom own Argus, it seems. And of course, the word rut. I don't know whether you realise this, but when you say deer go into rut, don't they? Okay, periodically. I want to tell you about a time I was riding through woods in Enfield. That's in North London, and there are still woods there. And I was riding along very quietly. I had a friend with me. We were both riding along, and suddenly we heard this clacking sound, like people hitting wooden sticks together. I mean, big sticks, not twigs. And it was a strange sort of primal sound. And when we carried on riding, and then we saw some muntjac deer. Now, muntjac deer are very small. They're like, size of Rottweilers. I mean, they're not that big for deer. And they were a decorative import that got loose and are now all over the place, much to the chagrin of farmers. So they're these really small deer, but there were two males and they were having at each other because it was rutting season, and they were clashing horns, or no, antlers. I was corrected on that by somebody else. They were clashing antlers, and it made this resonant banging, like wooden staves clacking against each other sound. There was something very primal about it. And of course, they were so intent on going at each other that they didn't. I mean, muntjac are quite retiring creatures for obvious reasons. They're quite small. They couldn't care less that we were riding past them. We weren't that close, maybe 50 feet or something, but it was close enough for any deer to take fright and go away. But no, they were so intent on their little spat between men, they didn't even know we were there. And so we were riding past, and we were in this quiet wood, little bird song, some leaves, obviously, it was springtime. And there were these two deer charging at each other, wrestling, breaking, and charging again, and making this deep, resonant, for little things, that deep echoing in the wood, a resonant sound. It was very, very primitive, and it woke something up in me, and that was I'd say a gift from God. That sudden drop into 3,000 years of history. I was suddenly back in time, at a time when people would go out and hunt these things, although not muntjac, because they weren't here in this country at the time. Okay, well, that was a little trip down memory lane. So she's written her 11th Rutcher Chronicle, and her caddish hero, Rupert Campbell Black, is back. Oh gosh. All right, now But where's the bit about being attacked in a taxi? Oh, well, I haven't found it yet, but I have found this. Cooper has spoken out about Me Too in the past and does worry, she says, with an eye roll, that these days if you put a hand on a woman's shoulder, you're about to rape her. Yeah, there were things that happened to me, gentle passes, which I wouldn't have regarded as anything more than a compliment, really. Rebuffed with, no, I'm not interested, and that would be it. But now you get women sort of jumping back and acting like something really awful has happened that will never leave them for the rest of their lives. She shrugs. The past is another country. Cooper worries that everyone is so very respectful now. Actually, they're not. They're not respectful. They pretend to be respectful. They're just frightened. It's not the same thing. I found the bit that gave the headline. But what does surprise me is the softening of her stances on various issues, despite the provocative statements and the jokes. When we return to Me Too later in the interview, for example, she agrees it is seriously awful for women, terrifying to be jumped on by a man. She can still vividly remember a harrowing experience when she was working for a publisher's in her 20s. I was taken out to lunch by a man, and on the way back in the cab, he jumped on me and pulled my clothes apart. It was awful. I was terrified. She takes a breath. When I got back to the office, I was in floods of tears and told my manager that someone had just tried to rape me. Cooper's boss took her into his office, gave her a cup of tea and insisted she tell him who had done this so they could report it. But then when I told him the man's name and he realised it was one of our authors, I was ushered out of that office in 2 seconds. So yes, I think Me Too has been good in many respects. Okay. Right, well, that's the Jilly Cooper story. And yeah, I've had that almost happened to me as well, and it's not very nice because you suddenly realise how very much stronger a man is. Unfortunately, that's the human condition. So there's always this grey area. There's the bit where somebody's just being a bit over-enthusiastic and you've just got to put it down to that. Or he's actually out to do evil. And the problem is that this Overton window has moved over, in my opinion, a bit too far into the over-enthusiastic area. All right, well, that's the Jilly Cooper one. I think that's going to be quite a long clip. Right, cut now while I look for the next story. Well, we have here the news that the King is going to return to public duties. The cancer treatment progressing reasonably well, according to the news releases. Anyway, you never know. I do hope that poor fellow deserves a chance at being a king. It's sort of ironic that after the long life of his mother, where he was waiting in the wings, suddenly he's onto the stage and, and sees that hook coming to pull him back off again. It's not fair, is it? All right, let's go to the next page. Okay, so this is page 4. We have an article here, cleverly, that's the Home Secretary, hits back at those who see country as an unequal partner in tackling illegal immigration. James cleverly has accused critics of Rwanda, Rwanda in this case meaning not the country, but the scheme whereby illegal immigrants are going to be shipped off to Rwanda. That's, in my opinion, it's performative art. How many of the 700,000 are we going to be shipping back to Rwanda? Not very many, but every so often there are going to be photos of plane loads of young men, because they're always young men, heading off to Rwanda. Well, that's like emptying a bucket with an eyedropper. James cleverly has accused critics of Rwanda of willfully ignoring the progress that the country has made in the last 30 years. Okay, Rwanda might be a better place to be, but shipping people off to Rwanda is not the answer. Maybe one or two, maybe a few, but really, they shouldn't be here in the first place. And that's the top and bottom of it. So the government is making a big thing out of shipping them off when they're here already on the soil. And as lots of people have said, our army veterans are sleeping rough, and whole barracks and hotels are being refurbished or set up to deal with illegal migrants who've just come here on rubber dinghies. And I think that's a disgrace. I think most people think that's a disgrace. And the government thinks that talking about shipping a few off in aeroplanes is going to mollify us. Well, it's not mollifying me. In what will be seen as a fresh rebuke to Emmanuel Macron, the Home Secretary hit back at those who see Rwanda as unsafe for asylum seekers. You want to know something? It won't be long before Rwanda is unsafe, but not for the asylum seekers, for the Rwandan people. I'm just saying, because there are plenty of places in England now that are unsafe for British people because of these migrants. He made the comments a day after Rishi Sunak took the French president to task for his criticism of the Rwanda policy as a betrayal of values. No, look, values is a word used by all sorts of people now, doesn't mean anything. What Macron means is that he can't manage the what's going on now, this sudden wave of people from third world countries. Well, not so much people. Young men. Now, I read a statistic once. In a bad situation where there are both sexes and all ages, the people who survive are the young men. And not only the young men, but the most vicious and selfish young men. So when this psychologist was saying, well, yeah, in a situation like that, the most aggressive and the least conscience stricken are the ones who are going to survive, and that is obviously what's a natural and normal outcome of an emergency situation. So what's happening here is that in these countries that are terrible at governing themselves and where things are really bad, the least conscience stricken and the strongest are going to be the ones who are doing the surviving, and they're doing the surviving by getting out into other countries. So what we've got here are not ordinary Afghans. Afghanis, I think that's the proper. They're not the ordinary, everyday, I just want to get on with my life Afghanis. They're the aggressive ones. We are getting the most aggressive of all the other countries coming here because they're the ones who can set off on rickety ships, risk their lives, elbow their way ahead of everybody else. That is just how things are. So Europe is getting what we might call the least civilized, the worst, usually. I'm not saying all, obviously, but there would be a high proportion of those sorts of people landing here. And of course, they're going to make things dangerous for anyone who's living here as well. And again, I say not all, but mostly. That's going to happen. It's just perfectly obvious and natural. So that's James Cleverly. And then in a sort of related article here, there's an article saying, reform the European Commission on Human Rights if it is used to block Rwanda deportation flights, warns senior Tories. Well, reform it. You can't reform it. The European Convention of Human Rights must be reformed, it says here, if it is used to block deportation of flights to Rwanda. You know, again, there's this whole fuss about Rwanda. That is, you know, as I say, a drop in the bucket. But they'll concentrate on that because it looks like the government are doing something. We should be out of the ECHR anyway. It's been taken over by woke. And in a related article to the Rwanda thing, there's here, Ireland reaping what it has sown with migrant influx. The influx of migrants crossing into Ireland from the UK is because Dublin is reaping what it sowed in the Brexit negotiations, a senior unionist has said. You see, what's happened is, with the Rwanda law going through, apparently a lot of migrants have been actually just going over to Eire, Southern Ireland, instead of hanging around here waiting to be deported. And it says here, Michael Martin, Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, has blamed the Rwanda plan for an increase in asylum seekers entering his country from Northern Ireland. Dublin believes that more than 80% of asylum seekers in Ireland have crossed the open border. However, Jim Allister, the leader of the traditional Unionist Voice Party, I'm assuming that's the Northern Ireland Party. Hang on, I'll look that one up. Jim Allister, Unionist. Sorry, I'm not that much up on Irish politics. North Antrim, yeah, okay. A British Unionist politician and barrister in Northern Ireland. Okay. However, Jim Allister, the leader of the traditional Unionist Voice Party, said it was not the Rwanda plan, but Ireland's insistence on keeping the border open after Brexit that was to blame. You reap what you sow. The Republic of Ireland insisted there wouldn't even be a camera allowed on the international frontier, and now they lament the consequences of the open border they demanded, he said. It's hard to find sympathy for those so driven by their all-Ireland agenda and poking the British over Brexit that they insisted on the very thing and now swamping them with immigrants. The Downing Street said it was too early to jump to conclusions about the deterrent impact of the Rwanda scheme. OK, let's have a look for something else. Here's more about the post office scandal. A quick rundown if you aren't up to speed on this. The post office 20 years ago installed a faulty computer system which made it look like some of the postmasters were stealing money from the post offices, and they were driven out of business by the post office. A local one to me was driven out of business. Some were jailed. And some died in misery and bankruptcy, and some committed suicide. And this here, and the post office knew all along that something was wrong, and they kept on prosecuting these people. They have now been exposed, but that won't bring ruined lives back. And not only the ruined lives of the postmasters, some of them young women. One of them was pregnant when she was imprisoned for stealing £70,000 that didn't exist. So, but the children of these people have had their lives ruined. I mean, remember, these people, many of them were in small villages, and suddenly they were thieves. Their parents were thieves. Can you imagine what they went through in school? Some had to move house and live in impoverished circumstances elsewhere in the country. I mean, the whole thing is just too awful for words. And an example of how the elite protects itself, because the post office was being run by an elite group. And hang the little people, quite literally in one or two cases. A former post office boss tried to silence the family of a sub-postmaster who took his own life by offering them a £140,000 settlement. Angela van den Bogart made the offer to the widow of Martin Griffiths, the sub-postmaster who stepped in front of a bus and died in 2013 after years of being pursued for shortfalls in his branch accounts. Can you imagine the hell that man was going through, and his family? Can you imagine what it did to his family? Can you imagine the heartbreak of his poor wife? And the sub-postmaster, I mean, you can't get a more respectable person in British society, especially in small towns and villages. Can you only imagine that? And this guy said, well, here, take 140,000 and shut up. The public inquiry into the Horizon scandal yesterday heard how the former top post office executive offered his grieving widow, Gina Griffiths, a £140,000 settlement on the condition that she and her family sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop their claims. So you see, what he was doing was he was stopping other people from hearing about this, other people who might also be in similar situations. A mind, a soul with no conscience whatsoever. I was talking earlier about migrants being the youngest, strongest and least moral of any society. They're the ones who survive. Well, this man is worse than them, so he can enjoy his dinners at the Savoy. He's seeing suicide and family breakdown all around him. And he thinks if he pays one of them, that's going to be relatively cheap because the others won't have the encouragement of an open case in front of them. Oh, in this case, sorry, Angela van den Bogert, a woman, sorry, not him, her. So maybe not dinners at the Savoy, maybe her Chanel handbags and her Jimmy Choo shoes. The agreement also stated that the payments would be made incrementally as an incentive to maintain confidentiality. God, what a demon. What a demon that woman is. Mr. Griffith's daughter Lauren subsequently spoke to Ms. van den Bogert, describing the offer as simply disgusting and saying she holds the post office solely and wholly responsible for her father's death. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Jason Beer, KC, the lead counsel, KC, by the way, for Americans, that's a King's Counsel. Used to be QC, Queen's Counsel, and they are the top layer of barristers, the guys that appear with the... it's called taking silk because, as I understand it, the gown they wear is made of silk rather than cotton when you become a KC. Accused her of using the money as a way of keeping the Griffiths family hushed up. You ensured that there was an NDA attached to that settlement. You agreed to the staging of payments to act as an incentive and used money as a tool to keep the matter hushed up. This is about the post office staging payments. Well, anyway. What a total disgrace. Just, there aren't words to describe what the post office did. All right, what do we have here? So it says here, doctors have been bribed to use infected blood products. Money offered to the NHS to buy imported US clotting drugs at high risk of contamination from HIV. Pharmaceutical giants have been accused of bribing doctors to use infected blood products that gave patients HIV and hepatitis C. This is a big surprise, isn't it? Pharmaceutical giants doing things that are not exactly restorative. Gosh, who would have thought that? Okay, next one. Offers pour in to rehome cavalry horses after rampage. I don't know whether you saw that story, but the horse guards, the horses were a bit sparkier than they should have been for some reason, and two of them threw their riders and then set off through London, and one of them collided with a bus and cut itself. So it just so happens it's a grey as well. A grey, you never in horse riding circles talk about a white horse, because it doesn't, well, there are some white horses, but mostly they're called greys because that refers to the colour of the skin underneath the white hair. And this grey, which, you know, gleaming white really, and had blood all down its chest. I don't know how it got into the spat with the bus, but I did see a photograph of an entire bus window caved in, and it had obviously cut itself. Anyway, they are now quite badly damaged. I mean, I'm not sure how they were damaged, but I suspect it was galloping down the road. When a horse gallops on something like tarmac, that's very injurious. The grey certainly had cut itself, but I think they're more worried about these horses being spooky than anything else. And why were the riders thrown? My suspicion is that the riders that they're using now are not experienced enough. The horse guards used to be, even farmhands, if they took a farmhand as a horse guard, the farmhand would have been used to handling and even riding horses. In fact, farmhands frequently would just hop on a dray horse and ride it bareback. So they'd know a lot more about horses from childhood than people do now. So if they take, you know, a fine young man who looks like who's sort of interested in becoming a horse guard but has never had anything to do with horses before, would have to be taught. And it's years of experience with horses. You can be taught all the theory you want, but unless you're in the situation, and you get into situations with horses, you don't know the minutiae of it. That's the problem. And my suspicion is that the two riders, I don't know, I could be wrong, but my suspicion is that the two riders had got some training, some good learning, but they didn't have the years. And that's why they got thrown. That's why they didn't control their horses well enough. All right, Yousaf, that's the Scottish First Minister. I will not stand down as SNP leader. So he's going to stick it out till the bitter end. All right. And then there's this story. Teacher had her partner's mother over for drinks as his body lay buried in the garden. Well, at least it was buried. Okay. You know, you don't get somebody looking out the window and saying, there are a lot of crows out there in the garden this morning. And here we have the race card. Well, not the race card, but what a lot of Muslims like to treat as the race card. Apparently, the chief rabbi criticised Khan. I don't know, but probably Sadiq Khan, our nightmare of London. Apparently, he was criticised by the chief rabbi, and I'm assuming that's because of the constant demonstrations going on that have made that, according to the police and according to London Jews, has made London unsafe for them. So Sadiq Khan accused the chief rabbi of singling him out for criticism over his Israel stance because he's Muslim. In seemingly incendiary comments, Mr. Khan, I like the way the Telegraph say seemingly incendiary, protecting themselves legally, I suppose. And Mr. Khan implied that senior members of the Jewish community, including the chief rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mervis, had condemned his call for a ceasefire because of his religion. He said similar calls for a ceasefire made by Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, had not prompted a backlash, and said that that was because he was not called Ahmed Bourani. He's called Andy Burnham, whereas I'm called Sadiq Khan. Sounds like there's somebody at the door. So I'm just going to check that out. Excuse me. Right. Amazon delivery. My husband thinks their coffee is the best. Okay. He said similar calls for a ceasefire made by Andy Burnham weren't getting the same criticism. And that's because Andy Burnham is, that's because Sadiq Khan is called Sadiq Khan, and Andy Burnham is not called Ahmed Burani. Don't worry, folks, he will be soon enough. April's not as cold as you think, despite late blooms. It may have felt unusually chilly, but Met Office data show it has been one of the warmest Aprils on record. OK, well, you could have fooled me, and I've been out on my horse in this weather. Right, let's see. What's this? Here's a picture of a whale. A case of the, hang on, let's see if I can, yeah, there we are. A whale. It was after a couple of seal pups. They went to land, the whale followed them, and now it's stuck. Somebody took a photo, so I'm assuming that the whale was returned to the waves. Seal pups narrowly escaped, becoming a meal for a killer whale, which then got stuck in the sand. Ah, poor thing. John Rollins, who took these pictures in Argentina, said, on this particular morning, little before sunrise, there was a group of orcas hunting sea lion pups at the beach. Germany has agreed to hold its first Veterans Day. Germany's probably been a little bit ashamed of the behaviour of its army and not had Veterans Day, but now I think they reckon they've wiped the slate clean. Let's see what else we have here. So there's an editorial here. It says, Scotland deserves better than this. The latest episode in the... You know what? I know I've got lots of people watching this, lots of Scots people watching this. And just looking at it historically, Scotland historically does not seem to have been that good at governing itself. You know, if you look historically, you'll see the old clans, they were always fighting each other. There just seems to be something in the Scottish character that doesn't seem that good at governing itself. Now, I'm not saying that England is that much better right now. It was better, though. But there's always been a lot of sectarianism, or clanism in Scotland that died out in it. I think it's the clan idea, really, that, you know, it's all very romantic, you know, and the different tartans, which, by the way, were an English Victorian invention. But it's all very romantic, but it's not that good for government. And somehow it seems to have moved along. I mean, Scotland's... It's made a real hash of things, the Scottish government. But we've got to remember the Scottish government is the product of the Scottish people. You have to admit that. I know I have mentioned this to my Scottish relatives on occasion, and especially one of them has been most offended. So I might be offending you, but I'm just telling you the way I see it. Now, if you can see that I'm wrong, then, you know, say something in the comments, if comments are allowed on this video. And I'm not saying now that England's doing that much better, because we are descending into clannishness ourselves, really. Anyway, the latest episode in the SNP shambolic misgovernment of Scotland has left many observers wondering how much further the party has left to sink. Entering into a coalition agreement with the Scottish Greens, arguably contributed to the downfall of former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Ending it could now claim the political scalp of her successor, Humza Yousaf. But the fact is that one of them is obviously legally suspect, and Humza Yousaf appears to have dipped into Scottish funds to save his family. So he's no... I was going to say he's not exactly lily white either. Oh, come on, that gives me a chance to play that clip.
When the most senior positions in Scotland are filled almost exclusively by those who are white. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The head of the Law Society, white. The head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every prison governor, white.
Right. Okay. And then there's this one. Camilla Tomini says, Tony Blair's great devolution experiment has been an unmitigated disaster. Almost anything that Tony Blair did has been an unmitigated disaster. He started an experiment with the British people, which is now falling apart and has caused untold damage. Oh, now, this is interesting for you Americans. I think I'll end with this one. It says here, I had no idea about this, meet the ex-Bank of England chief presiding over America's bitter university culture war. So it looks like we Brits are destroying your universities in America. As protesters set up camp at Columbia in the US, is its beleaguered British president finished? Asked Zoe Strimple. Even for those who anticipated an extensive backlash among Israel's detractors after the October the 7th attack, events at New York's Columbia University have proved shocking. If you don't know, one of the professors, a Jewish man, was locked out of the university. His card, the access card, was decommissioned. And he went there to try and get into his office, discovered he couldn't get into the university. Echoes of 1930s Germany there. Anti-Israel protests at the institution. Demonstrators are calling for the People's University of Palestine. Oh yeah, if only they did have a university in Palestine, they might have learnt something. Have grown astonishingly violent and threatening towards Jews. Before Passover came in early this week, Eli Buckler, a campus rabbi, advised Jewish students to leave and stay home, since in his estimation the university was no longer safe for them. On Monday, anti-Israel protesters from within and outside the university set up an encampment on the university's flagship Morningside Heights main lawn. The protests became so insistently disruptive that Columbia essentially ceased to function. And chants were, "We are Hamas, we don't want no Zionists here." Oh, good grammatical English. Go back to Poland was screamed at Jewish students. It was in Poland that about 4 million Jews were incinerated. But that's what they want by the looks of things. One woman clad in a keffiyeh scarf was filmed holding a sign that read, Al-Qassam's next targets, with an arrow pointing at the Jewish counter-protesters. You know, this is, I would say that I am fairly sure that the drivers of this sort of thing are mostly Muslims. That's what I believe. Again, if I'm wrong, let me know. I do believe that they are mostly Muslims. And what they are doing is turning the countries of the West into the sort of mob-driven mess that most Muslim societies are. And it doesn't work here. Right, well, there's just one more here I saw. It says, how Pope Pius V cheered up Queen Elizabeth I. The Church of England celebrates the festivals of popes such as Clement, Leo the Great and Gregory the Great. It does not, that I've heard, venerate Pope St. Pius V, Bishop of Rome, 1566 to 72. In 1571, with his encouragement, the Turkish fleet was defeated at the Battle of Lepanto by a Holy League of Spain, Venice, the Papal States and others. The importance of Lepanto is debated today by historians. At the time, it seemed of the greatest importance. It was November the 8th when news reached Queen Elizabeth I via the Spanish Duke of Alba of the great victory lately given by God's goodness of ye Christian army serving in the Levant seas against the Turk. The Queen, being thankful and joyful, therefore, as for a singular great blessing sent by Almighty God to ye benefit of ye universal estate of Christendom, issued an order of the Privy Council for bonfires to be lit in the City of London and prayers to be said at St. Paul's. Okay, so even though the Pope was not that happy with Elizabeth I, she could rejoice in a victory in the Levant that the Pope had a part in. All right, well, yeah, this is probably going to be very long. I might have to cut it up into bits. I've told you about my problems uploading, which are still ongoing. Okay, and after all that work, I do hope that you can at least feel so moved as to click the like button. You can also share, you can subscribe, please subscribe, and you can donate too if you feel that way inclined. But really, clicking like is one of the best things you can do for this channel. All right, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.